Hello everybody, welcome back to the channel. My name is Ron, and today we are going to be doing a build guide for the Nishanka Boltshark X80. This is the crossbow in Deep Rock Galactic. This is Scout's new secondary weapon. I've used it quite a bit. I think I've used it the most out of the new secondary weapons, and it's probably my favorite to use. I'm going to be doing a build guide here without any overclocks. I also just realized that I don't need my headset for this video because I can't hear anything. There's no music going on. Background footage will be provided. This is from when I took this weapon without any overclocks on a Hazard 5 mission with the Drac. I'll be doing this with all the new weapons, and I'm going to be showing you a few builds that I have run with the Boltshark that I find to be pretty useful. Again, this is without overclocks. I haven't got to test all the overclocks just yet with all the weapons. I actually don't even have all of them for the Shard Diffractor yet. I think I'm missing 2. Once I get all those and once I have adequate testing, then I will be doing overclock builds as well. And the Boltshark is pretty good just in base stat line. So the Boltshark does 105 damage. This is piercing damage. This is its own damage type rather than other damage types, as well as it does 60 area damage. So combine this, if you hit one target, you will deal 165 damage, which is really useful because that is enough damage to one-shot body shot regular grunts without having to worry about their armor. That works on every difficulty, and it doesn't matter how many people you have. So on Hazard 5, you don't need any mods to one-shot regular grunts. You also have enough damage with this just to one-shot headshot slashers. You nearly have enough damage to one-shot body shot them. I think you do on Haz 3 and lower, but on every other hazard, you will not quite kill them. So you will have to hit them either again with the crossbow, or I think you actually have enough damage just to hit them with the pickaxe afterwards. It will one-shot headshot them, and it will also one-shot headshot guards, because you also have enough damage to kill them, and you can also one-shot body shot acid spitters. Those are all really great breakpoints to hit with the crossbow. So the crossbow also has a very interesting tier 1, where you have 3 choices in tier 1. You have the special bolts pheromone darts. These ones act similar to your pheromone grenades, so once you hit an enemy with them, it'll mark that enemy out, and other enemies will try to attack them. It also slows down those enemies by 30%. This one is pretty useful, and you get the most bolts out of this, so you have 11 bolts base. The effect lasts for 10 seconds. You can hit multiple enemies with this, and enemies will just be trying to spread out and attack enemies that are affected by this. This is great for both multiplayer and solo. I would say it's better for solo because you can shoot this amongst crowds. If you can hit any sort of tanky enemy like guards or Praetorians, it's really useful. The same goes with bigger threats like oppressors, since oppressors are weak to melee damage and you can't have all the bugs attacking them. That is really nice. In multiplayer, it's not as useful against crowds as it is in solo. You usually want to be hitting things like oppressors, Praetorians, detonators, anything big that you want to deal more damage to. And the slowdown is pretty nice from the pheromone bolts. Our second option in tier 2 is the chemical explosion. These are our acid rounds or our explosive chemical rounds. These deal a certain amount of damage and area damage. All the crossbow bolts do. You get the least amount of these bolts at only 6. This lasts for 8 seconds. Over this 8 seconds, you'll be doing 10 poison damage. If the enemy dies, well, it still has a status effect. It doesn't actually have to die from the status effect. It just has to die while the status effect is still on it. After a 2-second delay, the enemy will then explode, dealing 140 poison damage to all enemies around it, as well as this can stun and fear enemies around it. This one can be quite useful for clearing up hordes. It's best if you can combine it with either the cryo grenades or you can combine it with the IFGs. I find it best with the IFGs where you can slow down a bunch of things and then shoot this into one enemy, kill that enemy quickly, and then have it explode, dealing with a large amount of enemies. I found if you don't have like an IFG going or something slowing down the bugs, these can be kind of inconsistent, at least on Hazard 5, because the bugs move so fast on that difficulty that they can spread out really quick, and the explosions might not get you a whole lot of value. This is definitely better on the lower difficulties, or if you have slowdown, either with yourself with like the IFGs, or with allies similar to a cryo cannon driller or a sludge pump driller, something that slows them down. Neurotoxin gunner could also work too. And then our last special bolt is the Taser bolts. These ones deal 15 damage and deal 10 area damage. We have 9 bolts in total, and this effect lasts for 9 seconds. Over this, any enemy hit with this will have its movement speed slowed by 50%. As well as they'll be taking 16 damage per second of electricity damage. This will, of course, take for the 9 seconds, and if you hook 2 of these bolts or more together within an area, they will arc back and forth similar to the turret arc overclock, which deals an increased amount of damage and an increased amount of slowdown. So rather than 50% slowdown, this goes up to 80% slowdown, and this will do 30 damage per second. This can hit multiple enemies, and there is one thing that's interesting about the taser bolts in that they are non-retrievable. Every other bolt, both the chemical bolts and the pheromone bolts, are retrievable even if you miss. This is because you can't really miss the ground with these, and any enemy walking across the top of it will get zapped a little bit, as well as slow down a little bit, and you can still arc them across the ground or across the ceiling, across the wall, whatever it might be. So these ones can also be really useful. I found them to be really good against things like oppressors and really good against dreadnoughts because the slowdown slows the dreadnoughts down a lot. It's very easy to shoot 2 of these into a dreadnought and then zipline behind it and deal a ton of damage to them. It's also just really useful for the team, especially in dreadnought missions, because your team is less likely to get beat down really fast, because sometimes the dreadnoughts will just chase somebody down and beat them up really quick. This gives them a little bit more of a fighting chance, and I think it's best used in those situations, as well as it can be used ahead of time. 9 seconds is not the longest duration, especially since you're probably not going to get 9 seconds, since you have to shoot one, reload once, and then shoot another to set up your electric gate. So at most, you're probably getting 6 to 7 seconds of active value out of it. So not as long as Turret Arc, which I think lasts for 15 seconds, I want to say. I would say in Tier 1, this is all personal preference. I found that all the bolts are quite good. It just depends on what you want. If you want to have some sort of slowdown as well as some sort of crowd control, I would say the Pheromone bolts are a really good option, because you can pick out big enemies that will distract the horde at the very least, give your team a little bit of breathing room, give you a little bit of breathing room. If you want to deal with crowds a little bit easier, the explosive chemical bolts work really well. And then if you want to have a lot of slowdown and potential utility against things like dreadnoughts, and the taser bolts are really good. So take any one of these. For the first build, I'll be showing with the taser bolts because I've been liking them a lot for those type of missions where I'm taking them on escorts or I'm taking them on dreadnought missions. In Tier 2, our first option is broadhead bolts. This gives us more damage and more area damage. Now, if you take broadhead bolts just with the regular crossbow, you can then one-shot body shot slashers as well, which is really nice. You wouldn't quite be able to do that before. Now you can, and this still is not enough to like one-shot Praetorians or anything like that, so you still need to hit them multiple times. It does help with a little bit more damage, so if you like that, this is a pretty good option. Our second option in Tier 2 is increased quiver capacity. This just gives us 7 more shots. Very useful. This is one that I've been taking a lot just because more ammo is really good. You can also do a similar trick with the Boltshark as you can with the impact axes with Driller. Whenever you get a resupply, and if you have more than your maximum amount of bolts, or more than half of your maximum amount of bolts, you can shoot them into the ground, and then get your resupply and go pick those bolts up later if you need ammo. There is also still the bug going on where you can have infinite bolts with the crossbow. I imagine that's going to get patched out at some point. I don't think that was intentional, even after they tried to fix it. And then our last option is expanded special quiver. This gives us 40% more bolts than we normally would have. If you take this with the electric bolts, you are then left with 13 bolts in total. If you take it with the chemical bolts, you are left with 8 bolts in total. And if you take it with the pheromone darts, you are left with 15 bolts in total. So if you like the special bolts, this one's a great option. For me, I usually go with the increased quiver just to have more regular ammo, but any of these options are pretty good. Just pick whichever one you like the most. If you really like the special bolts, take the special quiver. If you're okay with the damage, take the ammo. And if you want a bit more damage for one-shotting slashers, then take the broadhead bolts. In Tier 3, our options are stabilized arm brace. This gives us a faster reload speed as well as a faster swap speed between our bolts. So it no longer takes 2 seconds to swap between the ammo. It only takes 1.3 seconds. And same with our reload speed, it doesn't take 1.75 seconds, it takes 1.3 seconds. Faster reload speed is almost always a good thing with most weapons. You can't really reload cancel the crossbow. I've tried it and it sort of works, but it's not enough to really make a difference. It's not like the Warthog auto shotgun or the Lock 1 or like the M1000 rifle where you do get a significant bonus. It's very neglectable. Our other option in Tier 3 is Reinforced String. This increases the velocity, so we have 150% velocity rather than 100% velocity. I think that this one might have actually gotten buffed. I don't remember it being 50% in-game. I was thinking it was 200%. I don't know if Karl.gg is the most up-to-date with these weapons, but at least it does have all of the right mods here. So I was thinking that this one went up to 200% velocity, but maybe it is 150. Usually I go with the reload speed here. The reload speed and the weapon, or not really weapon swap speed, but the ammo swap speed is really nice to have. I find that to be really useful. And the crossbow I'm usually using at medium-ish range. so I don't have to lead my shot or account for drop as much with my shot. If you do like using it for very long range, then Reinforced String is really good. In Tier 4, we have Battle Frenzy. This one just makes it so once you kill an enemy, you get 50% more movement speed for 2.5 seconds. This one's really good since the crossbow can already one-shot body shot a lot of enemies. Moving faster is always nice, especially if you need to be moving around to reload, which you will have to do every time you shoot the crossbow. It's also great if you just want to switch in between weapons, because the crossbow does work pretty well with things like Born Ready, so if you want to run that perk, you can. Battle Frenzy is a good choice. Our other option is Radio Transmitter Module. This one makes it so when we hover our crosshair over retrievable arrows in the walls, floor, wherever it hit, then these will be pulled back into your inventory. And there's a little bit of an animation where Scout will catch his bolts. So this one can be pretty useful too. It's not entirely necessary, especially if you are pretty comfortable moving around the map quickly, but there are places where if you were shooting at like Mactera, or if you were shooting at leeches on the ceiling, it's just kind of inconvenient if you missed and you have to like grapple hook up there. So if you do find yourself doing that, then the Radio Transmitter Module is pretty good for that. Otherwise, I usually take the Battle Frenzy because I do like the bonus movement speed. And then in Tier 5, our options are Potent Special Bolts. This increases the duration of the effect. So if you're running the Electric Bolts, this increases it to 11.7 seconds. So we have a little bit longer, and you can get a longer duration out of the Electric Arc that way. With the Explosive Chemical Bolts, this one will go up to 10.4 seconds. This is just the damage over time, as well as the amount of time you have to kill something before it will explode. And with the Pheromone Bolts, it'll go up to an even 13 seconds, so you get even more time where enemies are going to be attacking each other. If you really like the Special Bolts, then this one's a great option. Our second option is the Magnetic Shafts. This makes it so bolts are magnetically pulled towards enemies affected by IFGs or electrocuted. This one really threw me off when I first started using it because I didn't understand what the heck was going on and why my bolts weren't going to the enemy that I was shooting at. This does make it so it's easier to hit enemies, but your bolts are less discriminate towards which enemies they're hitting. This one also additionally gives you another 25% more damage and area damage as kinetic energy towards those enemies. So you get an extra damage stack on top of that, which is already stacked on top if you're using something like the IFGs, which give you a 30% more damage buff. So you can get a lot more damage out of this. It works really well against big targets, so Oppressors, Praetorians, Dreadnoughts, any of them. Magnetic Shafts can really work, and it can work even better if you do have the Electric Bolts, which I really like running with this setup. We also have the Banshee mod in Tier 5. This makes it so when normal arrows impact the terrain, they apply 33% base fear chance to enemies within a 5-meter radius, and then this ticks over time. Fear is kind of an underrated status effect in my opinion. Fearing enemies is really nice for the team. This one I find to be fairly good, especially if you want to take like the Radio Transmitter Module and you intend on missing a lot just so that you can try to fear enemies away, especially if you're trying to fear away some of the more important enemies like the Slashers or Acid Spitters or something like that, so that your team can just deal with all the small enemies and then deal with all the dangerous ones later. For this build, I usually go with the Magnetic Shaft since it synergizes so well with the Taser bolts, and we can get a lot of damage out. This is more for a single target damage build that will still work against crowds. You can still clear up regular enemies pretty fast with the normal bolts and then use the special bolts and whatever primary weapon you're running to deal with things like Dreadnoughts and Oppressors and Praetorians. Another build that I like to run is the Pheromone Bolts, and this is just for a long duration on them to kind of make it so the team doesn't have to deal with these enemies as much. So I'll usually run the Pheromone Darts, I'll run the Expanded Ammo Quiver. This is just so that I get more Pheromone Bolts so I can use them more often. I still usually go with the reload speed here, just because it's really handy to switch back and forth between bolts, and there's less downtime in between shooting. I do like the Radio Transmitter mod for this one. Battle Frenzy is also really good. This one's more personal preference than anything. And then I like going with the Potent Special Bolts. This way we have 15 Pheromone Bolts that last 13 seconds. So they last a very long time. It makes it very easy for me to hit things like Oppressors or Praetorians. Even if I don't hit them, I can still retrieve them with the Radio Transmitter module. So I can keep spreading pressure out amongst the enemies. I find this one pretty useful in solo. It's also pretty good in multiplayer so long as I'm only really focusing on big things. If you try using it on small things in multiplayer, I find that teammates tend to just kill the smaller enemies really fast and you don't get as much value unless you can just be hitting guards. And I've also been running a build that I've liked with the Explosive Chemical Bolts, which is going with them. Really any of these in Tier 2. I have tried the Broadhead Bolts and I like that. This is good for both crowds and for single target damage because it lets you kill things even quicker that are affected by the chemical bolts. Just shoot them with that, switch to the Broadhead Bolts and then hit them. It makes it more consistent if you're hitting things like Slashers or Grunts. Guards, sorry, not grunts. That way you can hit them with the broadhead bolts and more consistently kill them, so that this will go off and kill all the enemies around it. In tier 3, both these are really good again. I like going with the reload speed. I just find it super useful for most instances. Tier 4, again, I kind of like the radio transmitter for this, just in case I am missing the chemical bolts, I can recall them back without any issue. But the Battle Frenzy is also really good, because Battle Frenzy can also trigger whenever the explosive chemical bolts do kill something, or whenever the Taser bolts kill something as well. And then in tier 5, I do like the Banshee module, especially with the radio transmitter mod. This way, even if I'm missing with my bolts, I can still potentially fear enemies, or if I'm intentionally missing in front of like Praetorians or something, I can get those bolts back and then use them again later. It's also very useful to have the fear mod when you have the explosive chemical mod, to hit something, kill it with the explosive chemical mod, or wait for it to take down and then shoot in front of enemies so that they move backward into the enemy that's exploding. So these are the builds that I have been using with the Boltshark. I found it to be really useful. I found it to be extremely flexible too, which is nice. It's actually much more of a utility weapon than I thought it would be. I figured this would be a lot more single target damage, but with its tier 1 options, it has a lot of utility and a lot of synergies with your weapons. Tell me how you're liking the Boltshark and the way that you build it. Thanks so much for watching this. Hopefully this video helped you guys out a little bit, gave you some build ideas, and special thanks to the supporters of this channel. These are my members over here on YouTube and my patrons over on Patreon. They get early access to videos like this, and if you would like to be a part of it, you can. There are links down in the description. Thanks everybody who does that. It does help out the channel a lot. You guys have a great day, and I will talk to you next time. Bye-bye!